From Boston University and BU Alumni Relations, welcome to Proud to BU Around the World. I'm your host, Jeff Murphy, and this season, we're taking the podcast on the road to meet some of our most interesting and accomplished alumni navigating life and careers in cities across the globe. My guest today is actor and comedian Jamie Kaler. Jamie graduated from the College of Arts and Sciences in 1987, and following his time at BU, he served in the U.S. Navy before going on to a career in comedy and acting. Best known for his starring role as Mike on the hit TBS show My Boys, his credits in an impressive career include roles on Friends, Will and Grace, How I Met Your Mother, Parenthood, and NCIS. Jamie is one of BU's more than 9,000 alumni making a go of it in Los Angeles, and he joined me on the podcast to describe the work ethic it takes to be successful in Hollywood. Thanks for joining us in the studio today. I was going to ask you when the last time you came to Boston was, but you've been here quite a bit, and you're actually here for a pretty special reason.
I am. I do come back here and there. I'm a big Sox fan, and so I always try to come back and catch a game here and there. And my sister still lives down the Cape. I have a lot of family in Milton and stuff, so I'll come back to Boston. But I am here. I'm headlining Laugh Boston this weekend, where I am recording my comedy CD. I wanted to call it an album. I guess nowadays you could be cool and have
I still call it an album. You're going to put it out on vinyl.
I'll put it out on vinyl. And so I'm here to record tomorrow night. I'm doing 2 shows at Laugh Boston and recording them for an album. So I'm excited to come back, and I just spent a couple hours walking around campus. Really fun.
That's awesome. And you were just here. You were up in Salem doing another...
I totally forgot about that. Yes, I was here 2 weeks ago. So I host a show on the Travel Channel called Haunted Live. I had originally done a show called America Facts versus Fiction. I'm kind of a big history buff, even though my degree is political science. I was always like huge history. I'm a former Navy ROTC guy here at BU. And so I ended up hosting this history show for them. And then I don't know if you know this, but there's no travel left on the Travel Channel.
I don't think I ever actually noticed that.
It's all ghost hunting and paranormal experience stuff, and it's blowing up. I had no idea the world really existed, and they were like, hey, you love history, and, ghosts are part of history. And so I started hosting this show called Haunted Live with these guys, the Tennessee Wraith Chasers, these ghost hunters. So this year they did this one kind of big spectacular for Ghost-tober. And so they flew me and all these celebrity ghost hunters up to Salem, Massachusetts, and we kind of explored the history and the paranormal activity involved with the Salem witch trials, which I still, to this day, the history of 1692, a bunch of teenage girls wreak havoc, so much havoc that 20 people, 19 are hanged and 1 dude's pressed it. It's really not that much different from today's social media, really. It's think of the damage that 14-year-old girls have done on Instagram, and it's pretty similar to the Salem witch trials.
Well, I had caught some of Salem Live because Twitter reminded me, I don't know if you know this, but it was trending
number 2
in Boston.
Yeah, it was trending around the world apparently, and because we only got to number 2 because The Rock and WWE were back on regular channels. They were on Fox that night, and so we lost to The Rock. But honestly, coming in second to The Rock, still a win. Still a win.
Well, I want to dive into more of your career because you've done so many interesting things. But I want to start, as I usually do, by kind of trying to take a look at where it all started. I know you grew up in New Hampshire, and then came to BU. I'm curious how were you always the class clown?
I kind of was. Always the smart-ass comedy guy. So I was always funny. Yeah.
So then how did you find yourself at BU? I mean, you came here and studied political science.
Well, here's what's real. I really wanted to go to UNH. I didn't know any better. Here's what's great about BU, and I'll get to that in a second, but I was just a New Hampshire kid. I really hadn't gone anywhere. We didn't travel. My father, we never even really drove into Boston. It's funny now at my age, an hour to me is a commute in LA. It's traffic. But when I was a little kid, my father would go, we can't go to Boston this weekend. It's an hour drive. And I'd be like, oh, it's an hour drive. No one could stay in a car for an hour. So I never really explored outside of New Hampshire, and I was a big soccer player, and I really just wanted to go to UNH, play soccer, and party. That's all I wanted to do. But my father was like, we don't have any money. If you want to go to college, you're going to have to get a scholarship. And my brother had used a ROTC scholarship for the Navy at Notre Dame. And so I applied for a ROTC scholarship out of high school, and I got it. And so basically I found BU mostly because they were one of the schools that I could use my scholarship at. And so I kind of visited and I loved it and everything, but I didn't know what I was walking into. And once I got here, it really opened up the world to me in a way that I didn't really understand before that.
So obviously you were connected with ROTC, but how quickly once you got to BU did you feel like you were home at any point? I mean, did it feel like home instantly, or did it take some time?
Okay, so when I got here, they didn't have housing for me. So they put me up in the Sheridan downtown, and I lived there for the first 3 weeks of my college. and to the point where the Yankees stayed at the Sheraton. So I would be walking by, like, in through the lobby, and at that time I could drink legally. I was the last year grandfather.
Oh, no kidding.
So I could drink at 19 and then 20 and then 20. I was the last year grandfather. And so I went in, like, we would go in to the hotel and I'd be like, that's the Yankees. That's Lou Piniella right there in the lobby. And I'm like I was 19 at the time. And I just blown away. And so I don't remember feeling extremely at home, but I just I felt like, here we go. It was like, when you stand on the diving board and you kind of go, here we go, man. It just was this weird, like, opening of a window where people were like, there's a whole world out there. And I hadn't seen it in New Hampshire. I'd grown up in a small town in Hooksett. The big city was Manchester. I went to high school in Manchester, and it was like so small towny that when I got here and all of a sudden you saw this ginormous group of international students really everywhere, that it just opened my eyes to, like, oh, there's a whole world out there that I don't know anything about.
So did you come in knowing that you wanted to study political science? I mean, you mentioned that you're a history buff. Were you at the time as well? Or
I always was a history buff, and I honestly thought I was going to be a lawyer. I really was. So, and here was the weird thing. I knew I had a job. Like, I knew the day after I graduated I was going to be commissioned. So I never, like, most of my friends were like, we're taking interviews. And I'm like, man, I'm going to San Diego the day after I graduate.
Yeah. What was the commitment that you made for
4 years? So it's a 4-year degree, and then they pay for it all, room and board, and then you have a 4-year commitment.
Okay.
So it was great. I ended up doing 5 before I get out. But
so you finished up at BU and you're commissioned into 4 years in the Navy. How does it work out being the class clown in the Navy?
It was pretty good, actually. I got along well. I basically was your manager. I was on a ship and I had like 85 guys, and I ran a weapons department. And we went overseas. It was really fun. And we were living in San Diego. I was in schools, and so I lived on Coronado, and then I went to a school for like 6 months up in San Francisco, and it was great. It's funny today, too. I think kids nowadays, like I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it's like if they're not in sports and dance at this point, it's like write them off. That's what the parents are teaching you, right? At that time, everybody I remember coming to school with, very few people knew exactly what they wanted to do. I felt like college was going, all right, let's see what's out there, what we want to do. And now I feel like kids are really specifically so targeted, almost to a fault of like, hey, you're going to be around for the next 80 years. You might want to, you don't have to jump into something at 15 years old and go, this is the direction of my life. So I don't know. Back in those days, it was more, hey, we're liberal arts. Let's see what piques our interest.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time talking about that on this podcast. The whole thing is about people's career path and how they make these decisions and go from one thing to the other. So while you're commissioned, you've got committed 4 years to the Navy. Are you thinking about what happens? Are you thinking about the Navy as a career? Or do you already have some ideas about? Yeah, I was.
I really loved, like, my brother went on to become an admiral, and so he did like 30 years. And I don't know why. I was the first ship I was on, the captain was great. He would pull into, we went to the Portland Rose Festival. We partied and it was a ball, and we were, we did our work and then we would tear it up. I mean, we went to Australia and I went to Southeast Asia and Hong Kong. It was fantastic. And then the next ship I went to, the captain was he was more of a putz, and he was kind of like, let's clean and stay on the ship. And he didn't have the same swagger, and it kind of soured me a little bit. And I also felt like at that point I was starting to look for something different. In the same way that I became an actor, I feel like it's because I'm always amazed by somebody who stays in the same job for like 60 years and gets the gold watch at the end. Part of me now as a parent respects that and goes, I totally get that, the stability of it all, because I'm still a freelance worker.
Right.
But I do love, I hosted a ghost show. I'm headlining a comedy club. Last week, I shot Tacoma FD, a sitcom for True TV. So it's this crazy potpourri of I'm always in the performance mode, but it's always different. And you work on a show, and then it's a different show. And for me, I really like that aspect. It's just who I am more so.
So how did you end things? Did you just... You had a 4-year commission at the end of it. You said, I'm done. Or at what point? I feel like you got started with stand-up comedy is kind of where
I
your
didn't
actually.
No, I didn't start with stand-up. I think here was the other thing. And if I could go back in time, I would tell I was nervous, I think, and more insecure. And I think that's pretty common.
Sure.
Of course, as you grow older, it's so funny how, like, back then you're so insecure about your body, and as you grow older, you're that guy on the beach with the AM/FM headphone set and the skin like burnt bacon, where you're just walking down there, you don't care anymore, in a Speedo. But as a kid, I was so, like, I cared what people thought so much, and I was almost insecure to a point of, like, is this perfect? Is what I'm doing? And so when I finally got out and saw the world and did everything, I think it made me more open to go to try stuff. So when you have to get out of the Navy a year almost before you have to have to resign your commission as an officer, and it's a big deal. You have to sign this letter and put it in. You still have to do one more year. They try to convince you to stay for like 6 more months, and then finally they realize you're a lost cause, and then they just you're a short timer on your way out. And so at that time, I had 3 months leave when I got out, and I remember I lived on the beach in San Diego. I had an apartment down there with some friends, and I had 3 months of paid still from the Navy. And I said, I'm going to get a bartending job and just live life.
Okay.
And so I went into this one bar. I didn't know how to pour drinks, but I knew there was a microbrewery, only sold beer and wine. So I went into the place and I said, hey, I want to apply for the job. They said, we're not hiring. I said, it's okay. I got 3 months paid leave. I'm going to come in every day until you hire me. And she laughed or whatever. And I went in the next day, and then the next day, and then 28 days later, I would cruise by on my bike and be like, hey, is today the day? And she'd be like, not today. And then one day, finally, she goes, you know what? Today's the day. Come in tonight at 8 p.m. I'm getting rid of this guy. He's not working out. And so I got there, and I showed up, and she goes, oh, my gosh, I forgot to fire him. Come back in an hour. And so I had to leave, and I came back in an hour, and then I got that job. And then, so I bartended, and I was kind of starting. My friend was in an improv group, and he goes, you're really funny. Come do this improv with me. And I think I had always kind of had, it's funny, all my friends from grade school are like, dude, we totally knew you were going to do that. But I just didn't have the courage at the time. And so when I finally explored it, and honestly, I mean, coming to BU and then going to the Navy, you're like, oh, why am I so worried about what I'm going to do? It can do anything you want, man. Just take a shot at it. Who cares? But when I first got out, I was going to do advertising, and I was going to do a bunch of different things. And then I fell into this improv troupe. And as soon as I got on stage, I was like, oh, I'm home. This is it.
Okay. So looking back now, I mean, how do you feel like BU and your time in the Navy, maybe, are there skills that you learned, experiences that you had that you still draw on in order to sort of navigate this career in entertainment?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a professionalism that, I mean, especially like being on time, you know, like the Navy thing was still,
sure.
I had to fight it a little bit. I was almost too meticulous coming out of the Navy, and I had to be a little more creative and let that side of my brain go. I mean, BU just was an overall wake-up call. You would see all these other people doing things, and you're like, wait, you can do that? Like, I never, as a kid, thought acting was a real job. You know, like I used to do a joke that like, my father thought John Wayne fought in every war throughout history. He didn't. He was just an actor. His name's Marion. That's who he was. But that's what people don't understand. And so for me, coming here, I remember seeing plays which I never saw as a kid. I never went to theater as a kid. And so all of a sudden I would see stuff and just meet people who came from different places. And then all the classes I took, I remember studying with Howard Zinn and all these famous professors, and just listening to them talk about the world and be like, oh my gosh. So it just opened my eyes to be like, you can do anything you want to do, man.
So you got into improv.
So I fell into an improv group, and I was off and running, man. I out of that, I got my first. Some woman saw me, and she's like, "Hey, you're really funny. I'll rep you. You want to go out in some commercial auditions?" And I said, "Sure." And
so literally an agent, or
an agent,
yeah.
But this was like in San Diego. It wasn't like CAA walked in and were like, "Hey, you're going to be a movie star." It was this little tiny agency in San Diego, and so she sent me on this SeaWorld commercial. The very first audition I went on, and I booked it.
Wow.
It was like St. Patrick's Day.
You're like, hey, this is easy.
I was too stupid to be nervous. Like it was a cattle call, and they walked down, and they were like, it was St. Patrick's Day, and they go, sing Danny Boy, and I can't sing to save my life, and I was like, Danny Boy, the pipes are blowing, whatever. And they booked me, and I remember I made like $40,000 off of my very first job, and I was like, this is the greatest job on earth.
This is what, the early 90s?
Like 91 maybe.
Wow.
I'm barely in the SeaWorld commercial, but I made a ton of money. And then, so I did a Renegade episode, and I started taking a few classes.
So things just came from there.
Yeah.
Oh, so you are taking classes. I wondered,
I jumped in,
side, what your training
I mostly
was like.
took improv classes. I did go to one or two, like, serious acting classes, and they weren't for me.
Okay.
Like, the teacher would
in L.A. or in San Diego?
This was when I went to L.A.
Okay. What point did you move to L.A.? And then you're like, I'm going to give this a real go.
I had a few credits. I had done Renegade and Silk Stockings. I was terrible. I was a terrible actor. And but I was funny, and so there just wasn't enough work in L.A. or in San Diego. So I said, I'm going to L.A.
Yeah.
So I didn't know anybody. And I was 30 years old. And I was like, I'm moving to L.A. to become an actor. And everyone's like, you're insane. That's never going to happen. And so I moved up there, and the first year it was hard, man. I didn't know anybody. And so I joined a theater company, Acme Comedy Theater, and I just kept at it, man. I think also, here's what BU and the Navy taught me was tenacity. And it's sometimes like now I do a bit about have a plan B, because you'll see the person who wins the Academy Award and they go, I just never had a plan B. You always got to follow through. And I think Plan Bs are actually, you should have.
Sure.
You can't, otherwise you end up homeless. Like, I had jobs and I bartended and I always earned.
Yeah.
But I just kept at it, and I kept, keeping at it. And so I booked here and there and booked here and there and booked here and there. And then, I started to recur on Will and Grace. I did Friends, and then I did My Boys. And then that was when
Let's not skip over any of that.
No.
But so I'm wondering, we have so many BU alumni, whether they went to the College of Fine Arts and the acting program, College of Communication alumni who go to LA with looking to do what you do. What are those lessons that you're learning about going out for parts and what you need to do to sort of, I can't help but think about the story you told about going, the same bar every day for a month to show that you really want that gig. You're selling yourself. What early lessons are you learning about having success and booking those roles?
Well, I also had a sense of humor about it. I think, like, now I look back at that story and, I think if someone else did that, someone who didn't really have a sense of humor about it, and they just, I'm going to show up every day until you hire me. Like, a week later, there'd be a restraining order. But I was funny. And so the woman just every day, she'd be like, she would go, come on in. And we'd chat for a while. And she'd like, not today. I don't have any spots for you, but you're.
Yeah.
I do think, it's funny too with social media today. I have this big thing about, I won't write anything negative. It's always, if it's negative, it's about me. Like, I'm just so, and it starts at the top in our country about, like, just throwing insults at other people. And for me, that's not funny. To me, funny is when you insult yourself. It's always about self-deprecating humor. So my joke, if you're ever going to make fun of somebody, is to be so positive, overly positive, that that's the joke in a weird way. So I try to teach people about that, to be like, otherwise you kind of come off like a jerk. So there's a fine line of being like funny, knowing like the days when I would go by and she would be obviously busy. I'd be like, I see you're busy, read the room. Don't be so obsessive that you just keep going, it's all about me, it's all about me. Read other people and how they're feeling that day and go like, we have this crazy misconception that everything's about us, when it's like, oh, that guy didn't return my email. He doesn't like me. He hates me. I said something wrong to him. And then in reality, the dude just lost his computer for like 2 days and hasn't. But we have this crazy misconception that it's all about us, and it's not.
Yeah.
We're so minimalist that it's all, you should really read the room and try to read other people's emotions.
So you've had what any aspiring actor, I think we could easily say you've had a really successful career as a working actor.
Tell my wife that, would you please, for the love of...
But I was listening to your podcast, and we'll talk more about that, but you had this really funny story that I was hoping to get you to retell about how you kind of tell people about, like, when people might recognize you, or...
Oh, my gosh.
When you're talking about your career, I don't remember exactly how you put it.
I don't know how the story goes, but I mean, I'm a working actor. It's hard for me to remember that, because sometimes I get, it's the same. You get caught up in your own emotions of like, I'm not working. It's freelance. Every time I work, the next day I'm out of work looking for work. So you just have to be okay with the highs and the lows.
But you're one of those people that people know from somewhere.
That's
right?
the thing. I'm that guy from that thing. And there's a big movie, there's a documentary. I'm not in that movie, but I'm kind of in that vein of like, even in the airport, people like, they think I worked with them.
Yeah.
Or they're like something, and they go, and then they go, are you an actor? And you'd be like, yeah. And I'll list a bunch of credits, and they go, no. And then at the end, they end up going, yeah, I don't watch that much TV. You must see something, but I've also done like 250 commercials.
Yep.
So people have definitely seen my face. So, but it's weird because sometimes they'll do that, and then I'll kind of feel confident. I'll be like, well, I'm an actor or something. And they'll go like, yeah. And I start listing credits, and they go, no. And they go, did you used to work at a bar in Santa Monica? O'Brien's? And I go, I did. And they go, that was it. I was in there for St. Patrick's Day. You served me beers. And I'm like, welcome back.
You literally, I'm looking at your IMDb page. Saved by the Bell. Friends. You were on Friends.
Yeah.
Third Rock from the Sun, Will and Grace you mentioned, Arrested Development, That 70s Show. You did voiceovers on Robot Chicken, The New Adventures of Old Christine. I knew you from My Boys. I watched that back in the day, and that's where most people know you from.
That's the one that bought me the house. That was a good run.
How I Met Your Mother, Shake It Up, The Middle, NCIS. I mean, some of like the most important TV shows in the world you've been on. When you look back on all of that, are there roles that stand out for you as being like the best projects, or maybe where you felt that you did the best performance?
Well, My Boys is always the peak. Yeah. And honestly, it was like those four guys were my groomsmen. Like they're still... You
seem like you guys really were having a lot of fun.
I just played golf with Mike Bunin on Wednesday, and I just talked to Kyle 2 hours ago, and Reed and Jordana and Kaler, and the creator lives 3 blocks. Like, we still hang together a bunch. So I always feel very lucky that I got that, because a lot of actors never get that. To get that a couple times, then you're like, oh, you're William Shatner or you're Ted Danson, to have a couple runs like that. But so I did, like, Friends was seminal for me. It was huge. Like, it was such a big deal. It was the week they were on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine, and I was bartending, and I had shot a pilot that George Clooney had made for HBO with Frank Langella, and everyone was like, quit your day job, quit your day job. Never aired, never got picked up. I was back bartending like 2 days later. So I go to shoot Friends, and it was a huge deal. I just remember driving home that day like, oh my God, I just booked Friends. And of course I went back to bartending, and then one guy comes up to the bar one day, and he goes to order, and there's a TV over my head, and he's like, hey man, can I get a and he looks up and he's like, hey man, you're on Friends. That's what is playing over my head. And I'm like, I am on Friends. Yeah. And he goes, wow, dude, that's cool. Can I get 2 beers, like vodka tonic? And I was like, oh, welcome back to reality. So it Hollywood is this high highs and low lows. Yeah. And I look back at each one of those fondly. Like Will and Grace was a big one, because then it was the big show that I recurred on. And my scenes were with Gene Wilder and Jeff Goldblum and Lily Tomlin. And that was the first show where I felt like, you know what? I could do this. It was the first one where I looked at the regulars and I was like, yeah, I should be a regular on a TV show. Like, I could kill this every week. Yeah. And so that was a huge, but each one is a big step. I remember my first commercial. I remember my first guest star. It was almost like those were goals. And I think going back to the BU Navy thing, you know, the Navy has a plan of the day. What's your plan? What's your goal? And so I never was the guy who was like, my goal is to be an international movie star. Each year my goal was like, I'm going to book a national commercial. Next year, I was like, I'm going to book a guest star on a network TV show. I'm going to book this. And so when I booked My Boys, and I had booked a couple series regulars before and the shows hadn't gone. And I'm like, I'm going to book a show that gets picked up. And it was funny, too, because I had tested for another show. Todd Glass, you know who he is? He's a big comic. Yeah. Todd Glass was doing a pilot for Comedy Central called Inside Todd's Brain. Mm-hmm. And it was down to me and another guy. And I went and tested the week before My Boys. And I walked out of the room. Killed it. I called my manager and agent, and I said, you'll be getting a phone call in about 2 minutes, because I just booked that show. And they go, great, can't wait. They call me back like an hour later. They go, you didn't get it. I go, you're gotta be kidding me, dude. How did I not book that show? I was crushed. Long story short, that show doesn't get picked up. I go in the next week, I test for My Boys, and that's the run for 4 years that kind of establishes me as a working actor. Yeah. So you just never know.
Hey, BU, a quick break in the action to plug some of the upcoming alumni events taking place in California. As part of our annual Alumni Career Week series, we're featuring a number of opportunities to network with your fellow Golden State Terriers. On January 23rd at 6 p.m., we're exploring deep AI, opportunities and ethical challenges at Facebook's offices in San Francisco. On February 10th at 7 p.m., we're hosting a networking night for alumni working in entertainment at the Garage in Los Angeles. And on February 25th at 5:30 p.m., alumni are gathering for a networking reception at Cutwater Spirits in San Diego. To register for these and all upcoming events online and around the globe, check out the links in the show notes of this episode.
So, I mean, you've just shared some great advice, I mean, about the coming up with a daily goal or your, plan for the year. But are those the things that you tell aspiring actors or aspiring comedians when they ask you about, what does it take to make it in Hollywood? I've got all these dreams of being an international movie star, but how do you help tell somebody to get started on that?
Definitely. I mean, there's definitely little tidbits like that. At the end of the day, you better be a good actor.
It's a grind, right?
You better have some talent. Okay. And be able to... Like, people are like, you're just being yourself. I go, you be yourself with somebody else's lines when they yell action. It's not quite as easy as you... I mean, it is really easy. I don't know why. But it's hard to do. And so you do have to have that skill. But once you have that skill, then there's the business side of it. And there's a couple things. If I could go back, I would be nicer to every single person in the room, where I didn't, like, I would see comics who I didn't think were funny or something, and I maybe didn't give them the time of day, and that guy didn't become a comic, but he went on to run a network. He went on to be a giant executive producer. He went on to do, or she went on to do such and such. So I think I was I also was probably still in my insecurity phase where I just was like I was overconfident, acting overconfident to mask my own insecurities as opposed to being genuine and being nice with people and being positive. I just remember certain people who I look up to being like, even when I had crappy sets, I remember, certain people were in the room and I'd be like, that guy saw me. And he would be the first to come up and go, hey, that one joke, that was a great joke. And you'd go like, yeah, you're right. Thank you. And so kindness will get you places, and having a sense of humor and reading other people's emotions and empathy. I think if I could go back, I would probably try to push those areas in bigger proportions.
Yeah. So you're in LA, which obviously is the right place to be for the work that you do. But it's our number 4 BU alumni city. We've got something 9,000, latest count, 9,986 alumni living in the LA area.
It's huge.
And it seems like 9,985 of them work in entertainment. Are you aware of BU connections that you've had?
Oh, Nina Tassler at CBS. Yeah. They're all ginormous. I've gone to a bunch of BU. Jason Alexander. I ended up doing a bunch of charity events. I hosted the Redstone Festival for a couple years.
Right, yeah.
And I've done a bunch of charity events and stuff with them. And they're there. Yeah. Like, it's so... I just worked on Tacoma FD. The girl who plays my wife, we have already done 4 episodes together. We finally sit at lunch, we're chatting. We both went to BU. Yep. She was 2 years behind me. Yeah. I was like, really? Tina Arning. She plays my wife. So it's crazy the amount of people who are there. But I will say this about the business nowadays is that you used to have to be there. And nowadays, I think it's changing a bit where you can live somewhere way cheaper, because if you create it and you put it on YouTube, it's really the way in nowadays. It's not so much getting on stage, joining a theater company, pounding the pavement, handing out headshots. It's really about when you show up, they want to see your digital footprint. Because kids today can shoot a show in their backyard in Duxbury and post it online and get 1 million subscribers. And then when they go to, because that's power nowadays. That's really what the power is. Kids off of YouTube are booking comedy clubs in a week.
Well, it's also interesting from I'm a big podcast listener because of stand-ups and comedians who've gone on to do their own podcast. And so that's another example, I think, of where, you don't necessarily have to be in LA. You can record a podcast anywhere. And that leads something nicely I wanted to talk to you about. We were talking about on the way in, your podcast, Dadlands. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I will, actually. It's funny because my whole act is autobiographical. People will come up after the show and be like, that's not that happened. I go, that's exactly how that went down. And so the Dadlands came out of, I had just had the kids and I stopped touring at all. I couldn't tour while the babies were born. And so I just would jump up just as almost like a therapy session at little rooms around Hollywood. I would just jump up, and I was obviously exhausted. I was on no sleep. And one day I got up and I just started rambling about my kids. And it was pretty funny. And this woman came up. She worked for Babbel, which was a big children's site. She goes, hey, you want to write for me? You're really funny with the kids. And I go, you know what? I will. So I sat down and I wrote a bunch of blogs for her. And then she was like, hey, we're thinking about doing some videos. So I ended up going, yeah, I'll shoot. So I shot Dads in Parks, that video series I have that kind of went off. And so off of Dads in Parks, Scott Aukerman's company, Howl and Earwolf, called and were like, hey, you want to do a parenting podcast for them? And so I ended up doing Father Time. Mm-hmm. And so off of Father Time, I had all these elements. And so I needed an umbrella kind of thing to kind of contain them all. And once I just came up with the Dadlands with a couple friends, and then so we started that. And then I didn't want to do Father Time anymore because I didn't really want to be the Charlie Rose or what you're doing, the interview guy, which, by the way, is a really hard job. It's a hard job, and it's people don't get enough credit to actually like keep the conversation moving and questioning. But I did like 50 of them. I had Joe Coy, Bert Kreischer, Penn Jillette, Jason Alexander did one, like these huge celebs, and it was really fun. But because of the journey I was trying to take them on, I felt like an interviewer, and so I kind of wanted to be more of the funny guy with them. Mm-hmm. So we ended up just starting the Dadlands podcast, and that's kind of gone off on that tangent. So all these different parenting things are just another creative outlet for my comedy.
So you're doing tons of things. I mean, you've got a show tonight, doing stand-up. I know you're trying out for more shows. You mentioned sort of having, the Navy plan and having some goals. What are you hoping to do from here? Are you continue to piece things together, or do you have other, big projects you've got kind of irons in the fire?
That's another thing I learned. It's funny, all these little lessons are coming out. I didn't really even realize that I learned either here at BU or in the Navy. but not to just have one poker in the fire, man. And I think entertainment is so like that, where people go, I'm going to be a movie star. You have no idea where you're going to end up. If I could go back, I would have gotten into hosting way earlier. People, when I was on stage in theater companies doing improv, people would come up and they wanted me to host like dating shows or something on TV. And I was, at the time, I was also single. I didn't need the money. So I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to be Ted Danson on Cheers. That's all I ever wanted to be, was Ted Danson on Cheers. But all of a sudden you start to go, and as soon as you explore everything and do all these different avenues, work begets work. And so because I ended up hosting that crazy show for the Discovery Channel, I ended up in the Haunted Salem Live. And because of that, I ended up in this other thing. And because of that, I ended up doing the podcast. And because I did the podcast with the Super Trooper guys from Tacoma FD, when they were casting the chief of police, they said, we need a guy with a giant Irish head. And so they called me and they just offered me the part. And I was like, so work begets work. And it was funny, too. Kids kind of taught me that, because before the kids, when I was on My Boys, I had a bank full of money, and I just said no to a lot of things. I didn't want to do it. I just go golfing. I didn't care. And as soon as the kids came along, I was like, I really need to monetize this thing. And I started saying yes to so many different things that I probably would have said no to a few years earlier. And because I said yes, amazing things came from it. It is a community, and I think that's the other thing that I learned here and in the Navy, is that no one gets there alone, man. You really, when those people get up at the Academy Awards and they thank 100 people, it's because it really is. Every single job that you get along the way is because of a casting director or a theater guy who put you in something, or a friend who brought you in to do something. Like I got Robot Chicken because I was working on that pilot that never went, and his girlfriend, Seth Green's girlfriend, was in the show, and he was like, hey, man, you want to do some voices on this thing? And I went, yeah. And then 3 years later, he started making Robot Chicken.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Jamie, it's been awesome to have you here in the studio, and thanks for coming back to Boston. I'm glad you were back in Boston, but have a great show tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's so nostalgic today to walk around and see the students. And honestly, it kind of relights the pilot fire of creativity. You must feel that way, like walking around a campus and just seeing these kids with the hope in their eyes. And yeah, I think as you get old, especially in today's society with all the crazy social media going on, people get a little tribal and they try to stay in their little groups instead of opening their eyes and getting out there. And walking around the campus today, I really you see all these different kids from all these different places just getting along, and their whole lives ahead of them, and it's kind of inspirational.
And when you think about all the different things that they're studying and all the things that they'll go on to do, that's certainly one of the reasons why you mentioned, people who've had these, careers at one place. I've been at BU for almost 20 years. And I think that's a big reason why is being a part of that community has been really rewarding. But. Yeah,
there is something they say something about having elderly people live on campuses. Have you seen that whole thing?
No.
There's a big influx of bringing elderly people to live on campuses all over the country, and it's almost a rejuvenation. And when they do that, they live longer. They're more creative. They have all these outlets because of the campus lifestyle that is so prevalent in that.
Well, when you're ready to turn the spotlight off, we'll find a place for you here on
don't even say that, because my wife and I we have two little gingers. We can't be in California for long. They can't be in the sun that much. We might have to bring them back to Boston where they should be. This is like their home base.
All right, well, I'm glad we've settled it. Thanks again, Jamie.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Jamie for joining me on the podcast. I had a great time talking with him. If you enjoyed our conversation, check out thedadlands.io, where you'll find blogs, videos, and podcasts featuring Jamie's hilarious perspective on parenting and more. If you want to keep up with all of Jamie's current projects, be sure to like his official Facebook page or follow him on Instagram @JamieKaler. You'll find all the links in the show notes for this episode. On behalf of everyone on the BU Alumni Relations team, thanks so much for listening to Proud to Be You. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast wherever you find your episodes. I'm Jeff Murphy, and no matter where your path takes you, be proud to be you. The Proud to Be You podcast is produced by Boston University Alumni Relations. Our theme is from Jump and APM Music. To learn more about Proud to Be You, visit bu.edu/proudtobeyou.